look at that 80% economy, it's a bad economy. The death rates are rising from opiates, from suicides, the usefulness is declining. I mean, we have to deal with that.
Yeah, we have to understand that there is legitimate fear.
I think it's important to understand that what we're in is a period of time that's somewhat analogous to the late 30s in that there are all these debt cycles. There's a short-term debt cycle, long-term debt cycle. And in 1929 to 32, we had a debt crisis, and then interest rates hit zero. The only other time that's happened is 2008. We had a debt crisis and interest rates hit zero. Because interest rates hit zero, the ways that the central banks dealt with that was to print a lot of money and buy a lot of financial assets to push those asset prices up, to lower interest rates, and to push liquidity into the system. And that caused a lot of assets to rise. With that contributed to a wealth gap. There were other reasons, technology and so on, for producing a wealth gap, and also a divergence. And so today, the top 0.1% of the population's net worth is equal to the bottom 90% combined. In other words, giant wealth gap. And that was the same, last time that happened was the late 30s. And so we're in a situation when the economy is at a peak. We still have this very big tension. That's where we are today. We're in the part of the economic cycle, which is the later part of the cycle, because as you start to run into capacity constraints, unemployment rates are low and so on, central banks begin to put on the brake and they begin to tighten monetary policy. So we're 9 years into this expansion, and the capacity to deal with that is different. So we're in a situation where if you have a downturn, and we will have a downturn, I worry that polarity will become greater. I think that the unity of us, how we approach our problems together, is a very important thing. If you look at the condition, capitalism basically is not working for the majority of people. That's just a reality. And yet there's opportunity. So we've got to make it work for the majority of people. And you're in a situation where, like today, the Fed did a study that 40% of the population could not raise $400 in the event of an emergency. I mean, it gives you an idea of what the polarity is. And we often don't have contact with that world, but that's a real world. So that's an issue. And then I think we're also in an environment where, for the first time since the 30s, we have a rival power in the form of China emerging to be in a competitive situation with the United States, which is going to be, an issue. So I think it has to be dealt with. If I was doing it, I think that you have to call that a national emergency. And if the President of the United States, if they declared that a national emergency, that wealth gap and that opportunity gap, and then created metrics that literally judged the conditions of people and then took responsibility for changing those metrics. I think there's a lot that can be done in private-public partnerships and so on to be able to change it. But I fear that that probably will not be done by the next time we have a downturn, and I fear for what that conflict is going to be like then.
Yeah, I think that we all are afraid of that, and that number of that you gave of families could not raise $400 is shocking.
And the education system, my wife helps public education in Connecticut, and Connecticut is the richest state in the union. But just to give you an idea of the wealth disparity and the impact. She deals with public schools, with the worst kids in the public schools, and she supported a study that examined what are called disconnected and disengaged students. A disengaged student is a student who attends school but doesn't study, they just are there. And a disconnected student is a student that they don't even know where they are, they don't come to school. 22% of the high school students are one of those. Those students are going to be on the streets. You go to schools and they share books, In some cases, they literally share pencils. They'll take a pencil and they'll either pass it back and forth or break it in half and sharpen it from both ends. The conditions are, it's unfair, it's an intolerable thing. And so those things are not being dealt with. So anyway, I think that that's a real problem. There's a lot of justification. We have to make the system work for the majority of people. If you look at the wealth gap, there's some, if you're interested, I've got these studies that I did that are on LinkedIn. You can go on. I broke the economy down from the top 40% and the bottom 60%. And I picked 60% because that's the majority. I could have picked 80%. The conditions are basically the same. And if you look at that 80% economy, it's a bad economy. The death rates are rising from opiates, from suicides. The usefulness is declining. I mean, we have to deal with that.
Yeah, we have to understand that there is legitimate fear.